Hello and welcome. This is our Kellerman Consulting presentation on sanitation programs and allergen controls for food facilities. Some of the people who have already joined I recognize, and it's great to see the folks are still around and still interested in listening to what I have to say. For those of you who are new to Kellerman Consulting webinars, this is entirely intended to be of educational value. And in this case, we're going to be talking about some pretty niche concepts here. We're getting into the intersection, the unity of sanitation and allergen. So if you're new to either sanitation programs or allergen controls, we're probably going to skip some of the basics here, although we are going to cover the construct of sanitation programs. So you'll get some of that. There are folks that are already using the chat function here, which is awesome. If you want at any point for me to stop and answer any specific questions, I love to do that in these webinars. It would be great. So please feel free to use that if there's anything extra you want to see. Oftentimes we provide handouts. We didn't do that this time only because this is so specific and it's so specific to each facility. We really didn't have like a general document that would apply where this is. So the chat function's where it's at. Please feel free to chime in at any time. So let's jump right into allergens and sanitation. This one's going to be, we're going to really kind of thread a needle here because those are two very large concepts. What I really wanted to get at here, and this was based on some of the on-sites I've been doing recently and where my mind has gone on these two things. How do we use sanitation within a facility that has allergens? What are our obligations if we don't have allergens? It gets pretty confusing. What I see out there in the world is that this remains a very difficult to understand concept. So we're going to get at some structural elements of allergen control, and we're going to zero in on sanitation within a larger context. And then we'll spend the second half of this presentation really focusing on sanitation as it pertains to allergens and what we're checking for. So within that, we're going to talk about, we're going to start with like, what are the biggest concerns with allergens? I think those of you who have them know they are a big concern. We're going to look at a quick risk assessment and those allergen practices based on risk. Within that, that's where we're really going to dial into structural issues versus where does sanitation fit in. I'm going to give you a spoiler right now. Sanitation is the bottom of my list of ways to control allergens. Don't love it. Have to do it, but if that's all we have, there's only one thing worse than only relying on sanitation. So we're going to see where it fits in. Sometimes that's the best we can do, and that's okay. But we'll look at how that all fits in. I mentioned here that we're going to look at sanitation preventive controls and sanitation practices. I ended up, and this is how the sausage gets made on these presentations. I started and thought, I'm going to give everyone an example of a sanitation preventive control. And then when the rubber met the road, I ended up doing an allergen preventive control. However, I will make sure that we talk about both. So you're going to look at an allergen preventive control. We'll talk about how that would change over to a sanitation preventive control. And then within that, we'll have simple and complex allergen scenarios and how it all works together. All right. Lydia, hello. Great that you are here. All right. Allergen controls and where are our concerns for allergens? Well, number one, within controlling cross contact in a facility or cross contamination, I do want to mention we're going to try to do it properly here. Within the grand scheme of food safety in the United States, cross contamination is generally a biological issue, and cross contact is what we're concerned with the proteins for allergens. For facilities that have exposed foods that are manufacturing facilities, oftentimes we get focused on preventing food poisoning, and we are dialed in on sanitation for controlling of biological organisms. Things like biofilms are really topics of great concern right now around listeria. We have a lot of concerns about the contamination of baby food, things like that. Well, those are all food poisoning issues, and that is, of course, an incredibly important concept. However, what we find in facilities is that often folks are cleaning and sanitizing entirely focused on those biological concerns and don't actually think through what allergens mean at the same time. And that's going to be a lot of what we talk about in the second half here with our sanitation program is what does it mean to make sure that our people who are involved in cleaning and sanitation understand there is food poisoning things that we're worried about. There are biological organisms, maybe spoilage organisms that are a quality issue. We are doing ATP swabs. We're doing environmental swabbing for that. However, have we really thought through whether we need to also be doing allergen swabs or allergen tests regularly as a part of that larger context? What I have seen and what is pretty common out in the industry is a lack of awareness of allergens in the system, people not even aware of what allergens they have. That gets real confusing with specific ingredients. We take things like coconut that was an allergen last year. It's not this year anymore. We added sesame a couple of years ago. So those reviews of even understanding what are allergens and where we are targeting, that's an area of concern. Then, of course, the actual cleaning and sanitation itself, whether it's effective. And with allergens, those labeling errors, which, of course, at the end of the day are probably the biggest concern that we have. We'll look at all of these things in greater detail, but that's what our biggest concerns are with allergens going forward. You know, if you have a really high level quality and safety program, SQF, BRCGS, FSSC, you also have to focus on allergens in other countries if you're exporting to those other countries. That makes it really confusing. But one way or the other, that would fit into the awareness of allergens in the system. So let's shift our way over into this risk assessment, because some of you I know from experience are working in facilities that do not have allergens and thinking, well, is there something I'm missing here? Really, we want a risk assessment of allergens when we're starting to think through how does sanitation and allergen control fit together. So I've written up a basic risk assessment in the format that we use. So you can kind of see like, hey, when we talk about risk assessment, this is what we mean. I've got my square here that those of you who have seen previous webinars know. This is what I like to use. Green is maybe I don't have any allergens, or maybe I only have one allergen that's in everything. The minute that I am dealing with more than one allergen, with any allergens, and there's more than one, probably in the yellow. I really don't I don't care how great your facility is in managing allergens. If you have more than one allergen, especially if there's in different products, like you have a medium risk. And then, of course, if we have lots of allergens, if we don't have a lot of good controls in place, and allergens are a very high risk and have to be treated as such. One way or the other, where we always start is asking ourselves, how many allergens do we even have here? Because those of you who don't have allergens, for folks that make pet food, and maybe allergens are not required in that part of the industry, maybe I don't care. Maybe I can get some sleep at night and sleep easy because the allergens are not something I'm that worried about. But if I'm writing a risk assessment, I'm looking at all of my operational areas with allergens. Certainly, we're going to look at a map here that I've come up with. You might have parts of the facility that are in green here for low risk because I don't have allergens on the, one side of my business. One of my clean rooms doesn't have any allergens, or one of my production rooms doesn't have any allergens. One of the other ones has a lot. And so it might be low risk in the one that doesn't have allergens. And it may be high risk in the area that has a lot of them. So obviously our risks is going to be allergen cross contact for exposed allergens. And that is we got a question here. Let me just finish that statement. So what we're talking about with allergen cross contact is the touching of a food contact area by an allergen followed by something else touching that same spot. Steve has asked, more than one allergen, as in a different kind of allergen, tree nut or peanut, would be medium. Yes. That would, immediately, if not high, if I have more than one allergen, and Steve is correct, he's identified a tree nut and peanut, but I would suggest, hey, if I've got pecans, walnuts, and almonds, I have 3 different tree nuts, that's 3 different allergens, right? Tree nuts are obviously the trickiest of the lot because each tree nut is identified separately. But if I have milk and eggs, I have more than one allergen. If I have peanuts and milk, or soy and wheat, anything where there are different allergens. If I have and we'll get into this. If I have peanuts in everything, I can just call that, I might not call that an allergen that is differentiated. I can just say baseline. And we see that in dairies, right? Everything has milk. So we just treat milk as essentially as though I don't want to say we don't have allergens, but we baseline it to say that milk is going to be in everything. So things like cross contact, it will always have milk. And we're going to talk about scheduled build, Steve. So hopefully when we talk about more than one allergen, it'll make a lot of sense. All right, awesome. Okay, so for severity, again, in this situation, if we have more than one, I've set this risk assessment as medium and medium. To Steve's point, let's say there's more than one allergen here in differentiated products, which means I'm going to have to move from one allergen to a different allergen when I change over products. That's exactly where we're looking at medium risk. And if there's even more allergens, or if I have different combinations, then I'm going to be pushing into high risk. And so what are my controls? Sanitation, which is what we're going to be talking about in detail here. After I'm done sanitizing, I'm going to have potentially allergen swabs, annual allergen test kits, or just allergen test kits. I put it as annual. I'm going to use them once a year. Employee hygiene practices, that might be color coding of our utensils. I do want to talk a lot about these test kits and swabs. That's going to be a lot of our verification discussion. I'm not going to come here and tell you like you have to use these things. However, with the aforementioned, sort of thinking about, am I covering allergens, or am I too focused on biological concerns? If I'm doing ATP swabs and I'm doing environmental swabs, those allergen swabs are they're the equivalent, and you are looking for equally important things with that. And so if I'm already doing those, even if I came back on a couple swabs and said, I'm going to save a little bit of money and maybe take one one environmental swab and one ATP swab off of the docket, and I'm going to replace it with an allergen swab and an allergen test kit, that is a very appropriate thing to consider if I have a system where I'm managing both biological concerns and allergens. If you have no allergens, then I would just say, hey, you can go back and say, hey, we're going to make sure that people aren't bringing their peanut butter and jelly sandwiches onto the line. And we're really going to make sure that our chemicals don't have like almond shells as pumice in the hand soap. And that's good enough. We'll keep the allergens out and make sure hand washing's there. But if we have allergens, that's the kind of risk assessment. I do also want to mention this is being recorded. So if those of you wanted to go back, there will be a recording and you can pause it at that last statement. We'll also have some other complex things coming up. It'll all be recorded. Okay, so our allergen control practices. Now that we've looked at what a risk assessment would look like, do I have a big problem here, or is this no big deal? Within the context of what are the best ways to deal with this, we have some structural things that I put in here, and then some basic day-to-day verification actions. And I've gone from best to worst, and we want to go up the list. I see a lot of people going down the list, and I have seen specific instances in the last year or so that were particularly troubling, in which only labels were used to control allergens. So segregation is always the best, right? Keeping the allergens away from each other where we can is the ideal. We can do that spatially, which again would be the absolute best. Hey, I keep my almonds over here on the left side of the building. I keep my pecans on the right side. They never even come near each other. All my lines are separated by walls and space. That would be something where I could take the risk down, and maybe my cleaning practices down, and maybe some of the verification activities down a little bit. If I cannot do segregation, I should also mention segregation can be timed, right? We do almonds in the morning, we do pecans in the afternoon, we clean in between them. I would be happy with that too. But where we can do segregation, we can lower the risk. Where we can't do that, and most of the operations that carry multiple allergens really don't have the space and time and resources to have total segregation. So now we can think about maybe removing some of those allergens, and some of you are probably laughing, like, I don't have control over what my ingredients are. Understood. But there's always the possibility of saying, hey, I got this alternate that's a non-allergen. Maybe that will unlock my ability to be flexible within operations. So something to consider. Now, this is here, the third bullet point, schedule build, and we're going to spend some time. This is what I do see in very good facilities that are handling this in a way that feels very strong and firm, and what is lacking in facilities that are only relying on cleaning and sanitation, or worse, only relying on labels. And when we talk about schedule build, we are talking about going from the least number of allergens each production run. So whether that be by shift, day, or week, we start with 0 or 1 allergen. When we switch over, we continue on using that allergen where possible, so we don't have a break in the allergen profile, and we build up to the most amount of allergens. So if I have a product that only has wheat in it, I start with that. Maybe let's take a step back. I have one product that doesn't have allergens. That's the first thing I run every production shift where it's called for, where it's scheduled. After I'm done with no allergens, I'm going to move to the thing that only has wheat. So maybe a wheat cracker. Then once that's done, once I've fulfilled my production run, I can switch to the peanut cracker, that variation. So now it has wheat and peanut. So even though wheat may be on the contact surfaces, it's going to be in products. So that's fine. And on and on. So I may have something that has 6 or 7 allergens in it. But as long as I'm building from the least number of allergens to the most complicated, then that is going to limit the need to be relying solely on sanitation between cleans. I've mentioned color coding here. It is not a requirement necessarily to color code everything for allergen control. If you're running a BRCGS program, I would expect there is going to be some color coding. That's what the auditors are looking for. But the inspectors for the government don't necessarily come in looking for that. All right, Steve's got another question, which is awesome. Thank you, Steve. Okay, so now Steve is asking us, when we're using ATP swabs, would I consider the first time fails as an opportunity to improve, or would I look at it as flaws in procedures? Well, that is a great question. Now, I do want to point out quickly that in this case, by doing ATP swabs, we're really looking at the presence of the biological organism. So as it pertains to allergens, which is what we're talking about, and I'm so glad that Steve asked this because it gets at it. I'm only doing ATP swabs. So if I'm doing ATP swabs, I can infer allergen control. If I can get my ATP results down close to 0, I could suggest I probably am getting rid of the proteins that are going to cause anaphylaxis, that the proteins of an allergen may also be gone. Now, to answer Steve's questions, if I am failing the first time, you should be, obviously we're noting that. The first time I fail, it doesn't necessarily tell me anything, because if I clean and let's say after any cleaning, I take 10 ATP swabs and 9 of them are good, then I have an indication that there are 9 successful spots that have been cleaned to the point where there are no bacteria. It's like if I get like between 5 and 10 on those, but I get a 57 reading on one spot, I don't know that would look at it as a failure or flaw in my cleaning. What I would do is immediately I'm going to have to reclean as a correction to prove that our correction, that we're capable of doing correction. So Steve, in this case, you can look at it as an opportunity to improve, to say, hey, I don't want to be re-cleaning these spots. But separate of the opportunity to improve or a flaw, I would say, as long as my team, when they come to me and say, hey, I've got an ATP reading that's high, and I want to I need you guys to re-clean right now, and I want to see that you can get it under control. That's the most important piece. We should be trending our ATP results, or at least trending the high ones. And that is really going to lead to the answer to your question, an opportunity for improvement or a flaw. It's not going to be the first time. It's going to be repeated failures. And I need to see, what I want to see from my clients is, hey, we are keeping track of these failures, and we are going to try a series of things to fix that. Because if you could go back to your team, okay, so I'm sorry, your answer. So let me answer this. Okay, so we can justify it with 9 passes. Yes. Yes, that's right. I can look at it and say, if you have a systemic failure, a flaw in your cleaning, it should show up in multiple places. If I have a piece of equipment or a part of the flooring that is particularly troublesome, maybe there's a seam in the floor and we are cleaning the heck out of it and I just cannot get those readings. As long as that's properly discussed and assessed we may want to correspond with maybe an environmental swab in that same area to get a sense of what kind of bacterial issues may actually be there. We're going to be fine. We don't have to treat it as a flaw. Like I need to get new chemicals or change utensils. If the cleaning's good, those other 9 are good. You are correct. You can rely on that. With that said, this really speaks to when you bring up continuous improvement, and we'll get it back to allergens in a second here. But when you're thinking about a continuous improvement project, that means you're putting your foot down and you're saying, I am going to get this one spot right. And we're going to spend a month and we're going to fix this. If you can do that, if you can actually get that ATP reading that you're uncomfortable with, that piece of equipment that's just been reading high, if you can get it to where maybe a tweak in how you're cleaning and sanitizing, how those swabs are taken on that particular piece of equipment, that is a continuous improvement. But I wouldn't necessarily assign it as either with that first one. Okay, so coming back to where we were, the sanitation only. So after color coding, sanitation is obviously a requirement. If you have allergens on a contact surface and we need to remove it, that sanitation, the Cleaning and Sanitation Act, whether it be the overnight clean or the the pre-production cleaning or a line changeover, you need to do it to get rid of an allergen in order to prevent cross contact. But if that's all you're doing, if we don't have segregation, if we're using all the allergens and we're not really considering whether there was a chance to maybe use an alternate to ease our process, if we don't have a schedule built, and this is what I've been seeing in industry, those sanitation events are really pretty scary. Those sanitation is effective at removing those allergens, but if that's all you're doing, but the question Steve is asking, anybody who is doing lots of sanitation knows the types of things we see when we're doing sanitation all the time is unnerving. And if that's all you got, that is a scary way to be controlling allergens. I have dealt with clients that are only using warning labels. And this speaks to, and some of you may be from the bakery industry and you may know, and if not, let me introduce a concept of people who are adding little bits of allergens to everything so they can put it on the label, or putting may contain statements and saying, hey, it might have peanuts in there. So if it has peanuts, that's on you, consumer. I mean, I really cannot stress enough. I believe the government is not very happy about those practices. And I can't say who is going to or is not going to get in trouble. But, if you're attempting to control allergens without any of these other things, and you are only playing games with the labels, I cannot tell you how disappointing that approach is. I think it's unnecessary. I think reconsidering the structural approaches to how we segregate, how we clean. I know there are folks that run 24 hours a day for multiple days in a row. I've seen 24 hours a day for 6 days and then 1 day off to clean. Well, why don't we move that? Why don't we do 2 breaks in the week and then allow schedule builds to reduce the risks of allergen cross contact? And then those cleanings can be way more effective. So again, if we're only relying on sanitation and labels to control our allergens, that is very, very scary. And I just feel like that is really the precursor to getting some recalls and getting some concerning outcomes in production. It's very difficult for the crews on the line when that's all there. If they don't have a good understanding of allergen controls in larger sense, and they're only hey, we just clean and I put it on the label and that's it. When I talk to the workers on the line, the confusion of how serious allergens are is often murky at best. The confusion's high and the understanding is murky. So quickly, I talked about the verification actions that go with this. The allergen surface swabs, which are sold, they're very similar to ATP, except for that they focus on general proteins that can cause anaphylaxis. So one surface swab is just a positive or negative. Usually I think it's the ones I used to use were green and purple colors. Can't remember which was which, but purple was bad maybe and green was good. And if you swab the spot, they all came up, if they were all green, then there were no allergens. If any of them came up purple, you needed a reclean. So they're not allergen specific. They are just general things, which you can use those in a similar manner to ATP swabs. They can't be used, allergen swabs can't be used in place of ATP, and ATP really shouldn't be used in place of allergen swabs one-to-one. I think that you get pushback on that from an outsider into a facility. The allergen test kits, I see people using that. I mean, allergen test kits are expensive, and generally speaking, I have seen folks using only allergen test kits, like allergen testing products. If for a line changeover, that is a tough pill to swallow financially. But those would be the best. Would be the equivalent. Allergen surface swabs are the equivalent of ATP. The test kits would be the equivalent of doing environmental swabbing. It's more expensive, takes longer, but you get very specific information as to what's coming up. With those third-party labs, you can always send in samples to do allergen testing. Nobody is more disappointed than a person who's swabbed for allergens on product and sent a sample out to a lab and gotten the bill on that. So much like the test kits, it is not cheap to do that, but it is not bad. Very effective as far as proof goes. And then obviously we have our labeled checks on the line, which, as I've mentioned, I would find to be the most the least effective or the most sort of concerning practice if that's all that's being done. Okay, so with that as context, let us zero in on some of the sanitation specific aspects that we should be asking. Like if we're only going to use, let me go back a step. So we're going to say segregation, allergen removal, schedule, build, and color coding, whether or not those are in the facility or not, we're going to zero in on that sanitation. So as we can see in context, it's not my favorite thing. I would be concerned if that's the only thing I'm doing, but within the context of controlling allergens, let's look at our sanitation. Let's think about our sanitation practices. Are they focused on allergens? So number one question, as I mentioned before, I come across somewhat regularly, I think my colleagues as well come across, like, we don't even really know all the allergens we have. Some of those crazy statements we get on our ingredients, they're not clear. We don't know if the soy oil is a soy allergen. We don't really know if there's hydrolyzed soy. Is it soy? Is it not? We're not doing document checks on this from the supplier, so we're a little concerned. We should really spend some time making sure that we know all of our allergens. And some of you are, I'm sure, thinking like, I have 1,000 ingredients. This is going to take forever. Well, I'm just saying, knowing beyond doubt what allergens we have and what ingredients is the number one most important piece for developing a sanitation plan that is compliant with good allergen control. And then the second question is, could I do more segregation? I mean, that's my number one question. Couldn't I do a better job of keeping things separate somehow? Because every time I can do that, I am taking the pressure off of my sanitation program, even though I will still need to clean and sanitize. If I can keep it separate, then that is the best approach and the one that will most satisfyingly control allergens rather than just saying, maybe I should switch chemicals. Number 4, are my instructions for the employees or my workers up to date and accurate for those allergens? This is, for those of you who are running a GFSI program, what am I supposed to be talking about in my management review? Are my SSOPs, are my instructions for cleaning, are they up to date with the changes we've made to ingredients? Have I added allergens? Have we removed allergens? Have those been considered in my SSOPs? That's really important. And then, of course, lastly, do I have sufficient checks? If I never check for allergens, if I don't do any allergen swabs, I don't do any allergen tests, then I don't really know if I'm controlling it. I don't care what anybody says, unless I have total segregation or I don't have allergens. If I don't have allergens or I'm controlling them because they never touch one side of the building or the other, then maybe I can say I don't really need to check for this. I feel good about it. But if I have mixed allergens, if I'm in that yellow, that medium, I mean, I would be checking. I would like to see people check. So to go along with this, got a little map here that I've made. Many of you, if you've seen these presentations recently, know that these maps are becoming more and more crucial to me in our presentation. What I've done here is taken a facility, kind of divided it in half, and on the left side, you see a side that needs an allergen schedule. So I've put that here, product 1 through 4, where I'm changing allergens, and I have indicated clean up at least in between. And then on the right side, I have segregated rooms in which there are no allergens in shared allergens in each room. So there are allergens, but each room is individual. I love that right side. That is great. If I have a hallway and each room has different allergens, then how I clean, what my schedule build is, all of those things can work in a lower risk type situation, right? As long as I'm not bringing any of the other out, if I'm not bringing milk and wheat into the room that has the peanut butter chew, that peanut butter and soy, then I'm okay. Soy is less of a big deal because it's in both rooms. That bottom room where I maybe have almond treats, that room should only have almonds and nothing else. On the left side, I have indicated that we have a good schedule build with wheat going all the way down, the adding of milk, followed by the adding of the soy allergen, and finally and lastly, egg. And in this situation, we would not necessarily need to clean and sanitize in between those product changeovers because I can argue the allergen build is correct. So I only indicated clean up in between. So sweeping up, maybe a wipe down. Now, as I mentioned, if we're targeting biological organisms, if the things I'm processing I feel like could lead to contamination by biological exchange, I might be cleaning and sanitizing between my line changeovers. But if I have dry product, if my risk assessment for the risks of biological stuff is low, if everything is safe, if I have COAs for all my ingredients and everything's dry and I don't feel like, and I do maybe a product test at the end for stuff to make sure I do finish product testing, and I don't want to do a cleaning and sanitation for biological controls, and I also have an allergen schedule build, then sweep up and clean up would potentially be appropriate. If I don't have a good schedule built, then I should be cleaning and sanitizing between every single changeover of product. And there should be then ATP swabs and maybe an allergen swab in between because I'm not controlling allergen through the schedule build. I don't have room segregation. Now I'm high risk. And this is where I've really been seeing folks using label checks of like, well, I don't really have a schedule build. We just kind of switch based on orders and they come in infrequently. And so I just put in warnings about the allergens, or I sprinkle in all the allergens into every product so that I can just claim it on everything. That's, again, very scary. These practices, to me, when I see folks doing them, I feel like there's really, really good control. What you'll see in this picture, I do want to point up at the top, I have the ingredient incoming, and the idea being that ingredients would go down and around through the flow of the facility, and the finished products are up top. And there would be all of the allergens in both the ingredient storage and the finished product storage. And those could still be low risk. If you have parts of the facility where it's box in and it's coming out of that area, box out, so where ingredients just being moved, we don't need to treat it as exposed. So when we're thinking about the risk assessment of our operation, in those areas where we either A, don't have allergens at all in product, or B, it's part of the process that is box in, box out, we can keep that low risk and really should be focusing our attention where we think the biggest risk is. And in here, it would be the production areas, possibly that QA lab if folks are doing analytical testing and that has different allergen products being exposed at various parts of testing or analysis. So, Steve says it's a great map. I appreciate that. Would the color coding step be in the finished product? That is a great question. You know, generally speaking, you would probably end up having to confer with your customers. And then would the equipment in each room be color coded? If you took the approach of color coding, which again, I'm telling you, unless you have the highest levels of food safety and quality programs like a GFSI program, color coding is something that is optional to implement into a facility. However, anybody who uses color coding, I mean, you're talking about a conversation ender for any government inspection, any audit. If we have color coding and we're following it well, then it is a great thing to do. Now, color coding finished products, Steve would probably be putting a sticker on the packaging or having some kind of color code or a sign or a map. Vivian asked, would this apply to SQF? If you want to get close to 100% in an SQF audit, if you really want to be safe, color coding would be something I would love to see someone do. In the SQF program, when you get to section 2.8, which is where allergens are, you're going to see that it doesn't really say that you have to do any kind of color coding. BRCGS, otherwise, separate of SQF, the rules are a little bit stricter if you read between the lines, and generally in those audits. If someone's trying to do BRCGS and they don't have color coding, I warn people, like, you are probably going to get into a fight for your SQF facility. The auditor is probably not going to challenge you on that. So if you don't have it and you have a risk assessment that says, I don't need it, you're probably going to be fine. And in fact, if an auditor in an SQF audit says, I'm giving you a finding because you don't have color coding, I assume that they usually are doing BRCGS audits and aren't really thinking about the difference in those books. Just to answer back, to finish up with Steve's question, if the customer is asking for that color coding on finished product, then that would be probably appropriate. If you have your general allergen controls, like I would build the way I'm storing in racks, I would try to have my allergen build matching that schedule. So the non-allergens up high, and then going down to the most amount of allergens in a vertical column. But as far as color coding, whether you actually color code, you would check with your customers and think through how that would work. So determining the frequency of sanitation. So if we do need to clean and sanitize, if we are actually saying, hey, I got allergens, I got changeovers, I need to be cleaning and sanitizing, within that, as this is kind of the second half of the presentation, we're going to drill into like, all right, so we're cleaning and sanitizing for allergens. What does that look like? Here, just like with the previous map, here we're looking at actually, from a standpoint of cleaning and sanitizing itself, different parts of a processing area. So different parts of each room may need cleaning more frequently to control the allergens. Now, some of you have clean rooms, I know from experience, and so you just move everything out of there, clean the whole thing, fine. And every line changeover, I'm just going to pull out, my equipment, or the equipment needs to be cleaned itself, and then everything around, and you can just clean everything every time if you want. But in those large layouts where we have lots of automated equipment in a big room, we may decide that here, if I have a warehouse area in the top left there, and there's no exposed food. So in my previous map here, there was up away. So I had better segregation. If I don't have great segregation, but I do have a rack area that's kind of away from production and around the corner, maybe I don't need to clean that. If it doesn't have exposed food, I don't have to treat it as I need to clean that every single line changeover. But I should be cleaning next to that and all the equipment. And if I am looking at those areas that are kind of green, you'll notice my key at the bottom, I'm kind of using very informally some environmental monitoring type language here, zones. And I'm treating zone 1 as food contact, and I'm going to be cleaning for allergen control every single changeover. Zone 2, I'm right next to the line, probably cleaning that every single time, unless I have like enclosed ingredient tanks that maybe I don't need to clean inside that tank. Maybe I never clean inside the tank, or I do somewhat infrequently. Zone 3 is always going to be my biggest questions. Now, those of you who manage allergens that are like in the form of liquids and powders, if it's wet in the zone 3, if there's powders or residue that kind of is in zone 3 of the production area, I may want to be extending out the areas where I clean and treating that as essentially a high enough risk where I'm just going to clean it every time. Conversely, and this is where those swabs and those allergen test kits really come in handy and really are the most important decision maker here, is how do I manage those far away from the equipment? Inside a Hobart mixer, there's no doubt. We know we need to clean that thing. If I've got wheat flour and I'm switching to almond flour, like, I need to clean it. Easy. Right next to it, yeah, I'm going to clean that too. In the other side of the, 10 feet away in that kitchen, do I need to clean and sanitize the flooring around there? You can use allergen swabs, and we might have some test kits a couple times a year to really, really get a better sense of it. Vivian, thank you very much for your comment. She says that it's the color coding helps. that's what helps for me. So I'm glad that it is also helpful for you as well. But when we're doing our sanitation, when we're doing our risk assessments, please remember to think through based on, again, if I don't have segregation in a room and I am using allergen cleaning, how effective are those cleans at actually getting my arms wrapped around all the areas where those allergens may be? And am I doing it frequently enough and with the right? This is really to Steve's previous question of like, hey, man, if I am cleaning and sanitizing and I feel good about it, I get good results, then I can sleep well. But if I'm not checking to see how effective that cleaning and sanitation is, I really probably don't have a great understanding. If I get failures of swabs, that is a sign that I need to rethink what's going on here or at least monitor it closely. If I'm not checking at all, who knows if I have allergen cross contact? Who knows? I mean, there's also food poisoning issues with that. So here's what I was referring to. I had started with the idea of giving you folks a sanitation preventive control. I ended up using my main example as an allergen preventive control. So we're going to look at how an allergen preventive control works. We'll talk through what it would mean to change this over to sanitation. So this is my CCP chart. So you can see I have my report. This is a two-part slide. So the second part of this, and we'll switch right back, has all 7 of those steps, whether we call it HACCP CCP, whether it's a preventive control with a process preventive control, or whether I'm doing an allergen preventive control. I did my schedule build as the preventive control. Now, this preventive control may only apply, I'm going to go backwards real quick, so bear with me. The preventive control may only apply to the room on the left, this bakery section where I have an allergen build. If I have segregated rooms, then my preventive control would not necessarily apply to that. As you folks know with your food safety plans, if I put in a process preventive control, if I have a flow chart, I'm not allowed to have one flow chart with process preventive controls with those CCP steps that don't apply. With allergen preventive controls, that's not the case. Same with the supply chain and same with the sanitation preventive controls. They could apply to one section of things and not apply to others. As long as they're documented properly in our plans, we can have several and say this only applies to these specific allergens or these specific products with these allergens. So here I have my control point, which is a schedule build. I've got my 4 hazards. Each allergen has its own hazard and an explanation of the parameters, what I'm checking for with my schedule build, all my monitoring procedures, right? I do a management meeting every morning at 8:30. We have our schedule. I go through and I just check real quick with my production folks. Are we following the schedule build? That's a monitored allergen preventive control. That would be incredibly helpful. This is above and beyond sanitation, right? So we're not going to need to do a sanitation preventive control in addition to this necessarily, although we may have also special sanitation actions when it comes to allergens. Very quickly, just as the second half of this allergen preventive control, and this is very small type. This is something where if you're watching this on video, pause. For those of you now, you'll get the video. We can go back and you can see the language that I've used here if you want to read it carefully. But the long and short of it is, I do want to point out with our corrective action, if there's a problem with the schedule itself, the correction is to fix the schedule. If I catch it at 8:31 or whatever, during that meeting, during my 10-minute production meeting, then I don't have that big a deal. I can just change the schedule, make a note in the meeting minutes, the schedule was wrong, corrective action are taken care of. If I catch it during the production day, I have a long corrective action statement to say if product has actually been affected because we failed to meet our schedule or the schedule was wrong and we didn't catch it fast enough, then obviously I'm probably reworking or throwing away or doing an allergen test on it to see if there was actually a problem, which hopefully there wouldn't be. My verification is the schedule where I put it. So I put it in the share drive. We all talk about it. I put it on my Microsoft One, or it's in my tablet, and that reviewing of it is the verification. And I have my nice records here. For the records, I assume we would have an allergen swab in this example. So that's there. My production schedule, the cleaning and sanitation results, potentially with those ATP swabs, allergen test kit if I'm doing that, maybe once a year, and my pre-op inspections. For the sanitation preventive control, usually sanitation preventive controls, I just use like following the chemicals properly. If we did a special sanitation preventive control, maybe there's a special chemical that we use only for allergens, and then I could make a sanitation preventive control, the use of a specific cleaning practice, specific cleaning equipment or chemical, and say that's a sanitation preventive control applied when I do specific line changeovers. Otherwise, my sanitation preventive control is probably going to be uniform. You guys probably clean and sanitize regularly, whether there's allergens or not. If that's the case, then my sanitation preventive control would not be directed towards those allergens. So with the last few minutes here, we have about 7 slides left. I'm going to go fast because we're about 15 minutes, and I do want to leave a couple extra seconds for questions if we have them. So setting up the sanitation program, I just want to remind folks, if we're using sanitation to control allergens, it should have these 7 things. It should have 5 of these things with a couple options, optional things. My sanitation master schedule, which again, with an allergen consideration might be more complicated than just a normal sanitation schedule. So those of you who have a regular sanitation schedule should be going through it and thinking specifically, am I controlling my allergens with this schedule? Do my SSOPs specifically address allergens in them or the possibility of an allergen issue? Are my workers clearly understanding that some of the cleaning and sanitation are specific for allergens versus I just clean and sanitize because I'm afraid the government's going to be mad at me if I don't, or my SQF audit might not go well. So really my SSOP is considered for allergens. The records of cleaning, obviously crucial. Now, number 5 here is optional, but the allergen swab and the test kit would be a verification action that could be in combination with ATP swabs. So maybe I do 10 ATP swabs and 2 allergen swabs just to be sure. If you're not going to use those things, they can probably be risk assessed out as part of either my allergen controls or my sanitation controls. And then the training records in the registry, those are not optional. So there were 6 of the 7 were pretty much not optional, only those swabs and the test kit. So here, quick master sanitation schedule, just in case those of you are concerned. Do I have a master sanitation schedule? Place I'm cleaning, how often I'm cleaning it, who's cleaning it, and how are they cleaning it? We should have one of these for our facility. I know we're not getting into the basics of sanitation, but just in case, make sure you got one of these. Hopefully you all do. Our SSOPs, so the instructions, this is how I think of SSOPs. I did have someone suggest work instructions instead of SSOPs. The reasoning for that, the person said it was not, the work instructions could not be subpoenaed by the government, which I thought was a little bit, conspiratorial. But just consider, someone said it, I was like, yeah, I guess that's a thing. So if you're just going to use SSOPs like I do, we have our cleaning procedure, we have the chemicals and all that. The biggest issue are the notes and special areas of attention. So I can have my regular SSOPs. If we have allergens that we're concerned with, we should write it in, what the allergens are and why. When we're cleaning, we want to make sure we're removing these allergens. And that way the workers have a very clear understanding that, I clean and sanitize and I have my instructions and the cleaning manager takes care of business. I do what he says. But the instructions here to say, hey, just remember, we have allergens that we're worried about too, cannot stress enough. That is a crucial piece of how sanitation and allergens come together, is here in the instructions with that note for allergens. I have my cleaning logs. Folks, we need cleaning logs in addition to preoperative inspections. Again, hopefully I'm telling you stuff you already know and you're like, dude, enough, I already do that. Just in case, we should have cleaning concentration logs that do record and match the cleaning schedule when we cleaned. And then we have our preoperative checks, which are different, right? Our cleaning logs tell us we have records of cleaning. The preoperative checks tell us that we checked everything before we started up, whether it be a line changeover, whether it be start of the day. I have ATP results here. We could change that to allergen checks. If I was cleaning for allergens specifically, then I might have a spot for, did my allergen checks and my ATP swabs get done. I didn't change that on this document. I kind of left it as ATP. But in that spot where I'm checking off if things passed or failed, whether it's a visual inspection, whether I do ATP or allergen swabbing, if I have those checks in the preoperative inspection, that's going to be, for my money, the most valuable way to prove that I am using sanitation accurately to control my allergens. Anyone out there that is cleaning and sanitizing regularly and feathers in some allergen swabbing, if it's just an allergen swab check, and again, those of you who are Googling allergen swabs and seeing like, oh, this is so much, this is expensive, I'm already doing all this crap for ATP. I cannot, that's a financial issue. But if you can, it would be something that you can know that you're referencing this to any outsider. And Vivian's asking how many points of checks are recommended. Just like ATP swabs, what I would recommend is establishing a baseline, right? So picking some spots. If you're getting great results in the spots you've picked, move them around to a couple other pieces. So, and you're looking for, as always with any of these swabs, do I have anything that is causing me concern? And that, of course, circles back to the original question. If you fail an allergen spot, then I want that on your preoperative check every time. As far as how many points, if I had 5 rooms in which I'm doing line changeovers throughout the day and each room has allergens and I'm swabbing once a month, that probably is not great. If I did 5, 1 per each room, and maybe I did it every week, that would probably be in the realm of acceptable. And Vivian, one thing I want you to consider is, and I just had a client go through audit, and they actually had an FDA inspection right after their SQF audit, passed the SQF audit, which was great, and then they had the FDA show up. And in our discussions, we settled on doing ATP swabs once a month and doing environmental swabs quarterly, because that's what they wanted to do. And I said, well, we can try that. The FDA came in and said, no, I want more environmental swabs. But they didn't get in trouble. Right? That's the most important piece. When we're talking about how many points of consideration, how many checks should I do? I want to think through, like, if I'm doing enough so that if an outsider, an auditor, or an inspector comes in, that they're not, if you want to do more, great. If we've already got them established, then at least we know if someone says, hey, I want more swabs or more sponges or whatever, I'm just adding to what I'm already doing rather than being told you should be doing this. Okay, more often or more places, Steve, that is entirely contextual. That, again, a great question. More often, so when we're doing statistical analysis, even if it's just back of the envelope, if I'm doing 7 cleans a day, I have a conveyor belt that sees a bunch of different products, and I only swab at the beginning of the day, probably not doing it as often as I should be. And the same thing with your cleans with ATP swabs, same thing. If I have to clean multiple times and I'm letting there be a bunch of frequency in between, I clean, I swab once, there's 7 cleanings done, and then I clean and swab again, then I may want to look at doing more often. If I really only have one big clean and I can afford to do it, then I would say, let's do more spots. And again, when I find a result, whether it be ATP or allergen, and I don't like the results, that should get pegged, right? I want that swabbed every time I do a swab. Maybe I do it more frequently, or maybe I have more ATP swabs on that piece of trouble equipment or trouble flooring. But I want to peg that spot and communicate it internally. We've had a problem here. When I go look at these ATP results or allergen swab results, I expect to see swabs done on this spot every time we do it. And if I continue to see problems, let's do more of it so we can get a better trend or a better sense of what the problem might be. Now, that speaks to if it's a failure. If we feel like, man, I just do not like these results, it might be a failure. So to your point, or to your question, it could be more often if that is a representative sample, or it could be in more places if more frequently doesn't really do anything for me. So those preoperative checks with the allergen swabs included would be something where that should be gold standard. Anybody who would be coming into your facility and asking how do we have control over this, if we can present preoperative inspections with that, And I've got some more. Hey, we took some continuous improvement opportunities to do better segregation. I added a little color coding here into this facility to make it easier for my employees to keep track of their allergen control. And by the way, I've got a preoperative check with some allergen swabs in there, even if it's just like, hey, I was doing 12 ATP swabs. Now I'm doing 10 ATP swabs and 2 allergens. I think that what you would find is a lot of very happy outsiders looking at the program. We're at the last slide. I kind of got this thing through okay. Lastly, reviewing the plans and reviewing the allergen controls. This is ultimately, I think, where the problems for a lot of facilities start with, which is we don't review any of this. I've been doing it this way for 5 years, and my people, they come in, we do the cleans, we do the sanitation, allergens. I don't know. I think we're fine. If we are medium risk or high risk, I would love to see at your food safety reviews, team meetings, management reviews, a special spot for like, where are we at with our allergens? Are we doing a good job controlling them? Do we have structural things in place, and are we following those structural controls? And if not, do we have sanitation controls that we're really comfortable with, and are we reviewing them? If we have these reviews, along with, again, those kind of preoperative checks with allergen swabs, these are the kinds of things that you folks can sleep easy at night. If the FDA or the FSIS or someone's going to bother you tomorrow, or if you have your audit, these things ready to go should be a real smoothing out of those processes, and the people who are investigating are going to be quite pleased with the actions you're taking here. We should be reviewing when new allergens come in or new products with allergens. We should be reviewing our program every time there are new combinations of allergens. So we have an R&D heavy process with different allergens. The reviews should be more frequent. If it's set and forget, if we're making salad dressing base and we've always made the same salad dressing base and it doesn't have any allergens in it, fine, maybe once a year as part of the normal checks for this system. Whew. We covered a lot. There is an allergen control series on our website. I did want to give a quick shout out to that. That's available on our website. It's free. If you wanted to get into some of those allergen concepts at a more basic level, we kind of talk about it in basics. Otherwise, we got through everything that I was concerned about. We do have like a minute or two. If anyone has any questions, you can chat it out now. Otherwise, I hope that was a helpful use of the hour. I hope we learned some stuff, or at least triggered some thinking about stuff in the facility. Steve, thank you so much. And it was fun. I mean, it is fun for me. I hope that carries through. I love talking about all this stuff. So you guys are really doing me a favor by showing up and listening. Thank you so much. Wonderful questions. I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday, and it's safe, and everyone's nice to everybody. Take care. All right, that's it.